I never thought peace could sound so loud. It was in the quiet rustle of the curtains, the sigh of the kettle, and the faint hum of a house that, for once, felt like mine again. But before I earned that silence, before I learned to protect it, I had to face a storm that nearly broke me. My name isn't important, though most call me Elena now. Once, I was the woman everyone depended on, the one who never said no. My late husband, Richard, used to tell me that kindness was my greatest strength. I believed him. For years, that belief shaped my entire life, until kindness began to feel like chains around my heart. It began with their arrival, a flood of familiar faces and forced smiles. They said they missed me, that they wanted to spend family time after Richard's passing. But I could see through the charm. David, Rebecca, Noah, Emily, Paul, and Robert. Each of them came carrying empty hands and full expectations. They didn't visit to comfort me. They came because my home had space, food, and warmth that didn't cost them a cent. And as always, I welcomed them. I cooked, I cleaned, I smiled. But somewhere between the endless dishes and their careless laughter, I began to feel invisible in my own house. Then one afternoon, a woman named Martha knocked on my door. She was new to town, a retired nurse with the kind of wisdom that comes from surviving too much. She carried a pie and a gaze that saw right through people. "You've got quite a crowd in there," she said gently as we shared small talk on the porch. I laughed, a tired, brittle sound. "Family," I told her. "They mean well, do they?" she asked, not unkindly. "You look like someone doing all the meaning while the others just take." Her words stung, but only because they were true. That night, as I lay awake listening to the sound of footsteps raiding my kitchen, something inside me cracked. I thought of Richard, how he worked hard his whole life, how proud he'd been of our little home, and I wondered what he'd say if he saw how our family treated me now. The next morning, I called everyone to the living room. My voice shook at first, but I stood tall. "We need to talk about expenses," I said. "There are 20 of you here. The groceries, the utilities, it's too much for me alone." The room fell silent. Rebecca looked offended. "You're our mother. Are you seriously asking us to pay to stay here?" "I'm asking you to help," I replied. "It's only fair." Murmurs rose around the room. David laughed under his breath. "Fine," he said. "We'll discuss it." That discussion didn't happen until hours later, after they'd whispered among themselves, rolling eyes, calculating how to contribute the least. When they finally returned, David cleared his throat. "We've decided to give you something toward expenses," he said, like he was doing me a favor. "How much?" I asked. $200, Rebecca declared proudly. "For all of us, for the whole stay." I blinked. 200 for 20 people, 2 weeks, 3 meals a day, lodging, water, electricity, gas. Before I could even respond, Martha, who had stopped by again and overheard the conversation, nearly choked on her coffee. $200? She said sharply. "My dear, that wouldn't feed a family of 4 for a week, much less 20 people for 2. They ignored her. I forced a smile. $200, I repeated slowly, pretending to consider. "All right, I'll accept, on one condition." They all looked at me with relief, like children who had just outsmarted their teacher. "What condition?" Noah asked. "Since this is now a business arrangement," I said, walking to the coffee table, "we'll need a contract." They stared as I laid out the papers Jeremy, my lawyer friend, had drafted. "For $200, you'll receive sleeping space in the living room, 1 basic meal a day, rice and beans, and limited bathroom access. That's the standard package. If you want the premium one with 3 meals, it's $2,800. "You're joking," Emily snapped. "That's ridiculous." I looked her straight in the eye. "You don't have to sign. You're free to find another place to stay." Rebecca's face twisted with anger. "You can't do this to us. We're your family." "I'm not doing anything to you," I said quietly. "I'm offering options." Martha smiled from her chair, arms folded. "Bravo," she said. "That's exactly what my sister did. Fair terms, clear boundaries, no guilt. Stay out of this," Rebecca hissed at her. "I'd love to," Martha replied calmly. "But decent people don't stand by when they see someone being used." The air thickened. Even the children outside stopped laughing. Then Martha stood, Elena, if you need anything, I'm a few houses down. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. After she left, the silence was almost physical. That's when Paul tried a different tactic, guilt. Richard wouldn't have wanted this, he said softly. He loved us like family. I looked at him, remembering my husband's hands, rough from years of work, steady and kind. Richard taught me to value myself, I said. He taught me that love without respect isn't love at all. Robert's tone turned sharp. You're making a mistake. There are a lot of us, and you're alone. You really want to make enemies out of your family? His words once would have terrified me. Now, they only revealed the truth I'd been avoiding. They didn't love me. They needed me. Are you threatening me in my own home? I asked. He hesitated. I'm just being realistic. So am I said. You came here uninvited, expecting comfort you didn't earn. I asked for fairness, and you answered with anger. That tells me everything I need to know. That's when Emily started to cry. It wasn't sorrow, it was strategy. You're heartless, she sobbed. My baby needs stability. You're throwing us out! I steadied my breath. Your baby needs parents who can provide for him without taking from someone else. If you can't afford a vacation, maybe you shouldn't take one. A child's voice interrupted from the hallway. Grandma, why is everyone shouting? My heart broke a little. The children were innocent pawns in all this, too young to understand how selfishness hides behind family ties. Nothing to worry about, sweetheart, I said softly. Go play outside for a bit. But we're hungry, one of the twins said. I turned to the adults. Your children are hungry, I said. There's rice and beans in the kitchen. You can cook, Noah scoffed. You're not going to cook for us? I cooked yesterday. And the day before. Today it's your turn, but we don't know how, Emily protested. Then learn, I replied. Or take them into town. There are restaurants. That was the breaking point. David stood abruptly. This is insane. Rebecca, pack up. We're leaving, Rebecca froze. But we don't have reservations anywhere. Then we'll find something. Anything's better than this. I watched them scramble, the house echoing with the chaos of suitcases and slammed doors. When Rebecca finally turned to me, her eyes were cold. You've destroyed your family for money, she said. No, I told her. I've reclaimed my dignity. You'll regret this, she hissed. When you're old and sick, don't expect us to help. I'd rather be alone with respect, I said, than surrounded by people who don't value me. One by one, they left. This time, there were no dramatic tears, no last-minute guilt trips. Just quiet resignation. And as their cars disappeared down the road, something unfamiliar filled me. Peace. That evening, the house felt hollow in a way I hadn't experienced before, an emptiness that was not sadness, but space. Space for breath, for peace, for me. For years, every corner of my home had echoed with other people's needs. Children running, adults arguing, televisions blaring, dishes clattering. But now the silence had texture. It wrapped around me like a soft blanket I'd forgotten I owned. I walked through the living room, past the empty coffee cups and crumpled napkins they'd left behind. The curtains swayed slightly from the breeze coming through the open window, and I could smell the faint trace of their perfumes fading away. There was no shouting, no demands, no chaos. Only the quiet sound of my own footsteps on the floorboards. When I reached the kitchen, I saw the untouched pot of coffee Martha and I had shared earlier that day. For a moment I smiled. That woman, sharp, fearless, and kind, had appeared in my life like an angel disguised in worn shoes. She had reminded me of truths I had long buried beneath years of guilt and obligation. I poured myself another cup and sat by the window, watching the sun dip low behind the fields. The day had been long and heavy, but my heart felt light. I thought of Richard then, his laugh, the way his eyes softened when he spoke my name. I whispered into the empty room, I hope you're proud of me, love. I finally stood up. Just as the last rays of sunlight slipped away, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Martha holding a steaming pot covered with a kitchen towel. I brought dinner, she said, smiling. Chicken stew? You've had a hard day, I laughed softly. You didn't have to do that. Maybe not, she replied, walking in as if she had always belonged there. But you've had enough people taking from you. Let someone give for a change. We set the table together, her stew and my pot of rice with pigeon peas. The aroma filled the air, warm and comforting. When we sat down on the porch to eat, the crickets had begun their evening chorus, and a soft wind rustled the leaves of the guava trees in the garden. Between bites, Martha studied me. "Do you feel good about what you did?" she asked. I set down my fork. I paused, searching for the word. "Free, that's what I feel." She nodded with approval. "Freedom takes courage, Elena. Most people never find it because they're too afraid to lose what little comfort they have." I was afraid for a long time, I admitted. Afraid they'd stop loving me. Afraid of being alone. But today, I realized I've been alone for years, just surrounded by noise. Martha smiled knowingly. "And now you'll see what real company feels like. Your own." We finished our meal in companionable silence, watching as the last light disappeared. The stars began to appear, one by one, like blessings scattered across the night sky. After she left, I cleaned the kitchen, slowly, peacefully. I washed each plate, dried each spoon, and arranged everything neatly in its place. There was no rush, no one calling for me. The house finally exhaled. That night, as I got into bed, I realized how strange it felt to lie down without anger or anxiety sitting beside me. For years, I had fallen asleep exhausted, bracing for another day of demands. Now, for the first time in decades, I felt the weight of peace pressing softly against my chest. The next morning, I woke early. The dawn light poured through the window like liquid gold, and the air smelled of earth and rain. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and stepped out into the garden barefoot. The grass was still wet with dew, and the soil was cool beneath my toes. For a long time, I just stood there, breathing. I could hear the faint chirping of birds hidden in the mango tree, the hum of bees dancing over the flowers. Life was simple again, no voices shouting, no guilt gnawing at my heart. Later that week, I began to tend to the garden properly. I planted tomatoes, peppers, and marigolds along the edges. Each day, I worked under the sun until sweat dripped down my back and my hands were caked with dirt. It was tiring, but in the best possible way. My body ached, yet my soul felt light. When I wasn't gardening, I took long walks through town. People waved from their porches. I started recognizing faces: the grocer who always whistled as he stocked the fruit stand, the librarian with her wide straw hat, the old man who sold newspapers and stories in equal measure. Slowly, the town began to feel like home. Martha and I became close friends. Every Thursday, we met for lunch at her place. She'd always have something simmering on the stove, and I'd bring whatever was fresh from my garden. We talked about everything: her sister, my late husband, our shared love for jasmine tea. And sometimes we didn't talk at all. We just sat in her backyard, listening to the wind move through the banana leaves. Months passed quietly. My house, once filled with tension and noise, now breathed with calm. My days were mine again. I started painting at the community center, a class for beginners led by a woman named Clara who believed art could heal anything. The first time I picked up a brush, my hands trembled. I hadn't painted since I was a girl, but when the colors began to blend on the canvas, something inside me came alive. Each stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had long forgotten. 6 months after my family's departure, my life had settled into a rhythm of peace. Mornings in the garden, afternoons painting, evenings sharing tea with Martha. I no longer waited for the phone to ring. I no longer apologized for things that weren't my fault. Of course, there were moments when the past tried to pull me back. Rebecca would call sometimes, her tone sweet at first, then demanding, "Mom, I need help. Just a small loan. The rent's due and we're short this month." I would listen quietly. Let her speak and then answer softly, "I'm sorry, my love, but I can't help with that." At first, she would shout, accuse, beg. Then she'd hang up. It hurt the first few times, hearing that click on the other end. But with each call, I grew stronger. I realized something profound. Love doesn't mean servitude. Generosity doesn't mean sacrifice. I was learning the art of boundaries, something my younger self had never understood. One afternoon, as I sat painting a small canvas of sunflowers from my garden, I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who would bend until she nearly broke, just to make others happy. I felt both sorrow and compassion for her. She didn't know better, but I do now. As twilight settled that evening, I brewed a cup of jasmine tea and carried it out to the porch. The horizon blushed with shades of orange and violet, and I smiled to myself. Freedom, I thought, isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. It's the soft hum of peace after a lifetime of noise. Still, somewhere deep inside, I knew the story wasn't over yet. Life always has a way of testing the boundaries we build, and mine was about to be tested in ways I couldn't yet imagine. A week later, I was sitting on my porch sketching the outline of a hibiscus flower when the phone rang. The sound startled me. It had been so long since anyone called during daylight hours. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up, half expecting another telemarketer. "Elena," said the voice on the other end, hesitant but familiar. "It's Rebecca." For a second, the air around me seemed to still. My heart gave a small, involuntary tremor, but I kept my voice calm. "Hello, Rebecca. How are you?" She hesitated, then sighed dramatically. "Not good, Mom. Things have been hard. David lost his job last month and the kids have been sick. We're behind on rent and, well, I didn't know who else to call." I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. The familiar rhythm of her words returned, that mixture of guilt and desperation I'd heard so many times before. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said quietly. There was a pause before she added, "I was wondering if you could lend us some money. Just until David finds work again. You know we'd pay you back." For a long moment, I said nothing. My gaze drifted to the horizon, where a pair of birds were gliding effortlessly through the open sky. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who would have rushed to open her wallet, believing it was love. But love, I had learned, wasn't measured in sacrifices. "I can't, Rebecca," I finally said. "I hope you understand." Her voice hardened instantly. "You can't or you won't?" "Both," I replied. "I have to take care of myself now. My savings are limited, and I've learned the cost of saying yes when I mean no." "Unbelievable," she snapped. "You're really going to let your own daughter struggle while you sit there painting flowers?" Her words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they used to control me. I took a slow breath before answering. "I spent most of my life rescuing people who never wanted to save themselves, Rebecca. I'm done doing that. You and David are adults. You'll find a way." There was silence, heavy and charged, and then the familiar sound of her hanging up. The line went dead. I set the phone down gently. There was no anger in me this time, no guilt either. Only a strange, clean ache, like the soreness that follows healing. Later that afternoon, I told Martha about the call as we sat under the shade of her avocado tree. She listened, nodding slowly, her weathered hands shelling peas into a bowl. "She'll come around eventually," Martha said. "But even if she doesn't, you've done the right thing. Love without boundaries turns into self-destruction." "I know," I said softly. "It's just that sometimes I miss her. Not this version of her, but the girl she used to be. The one who'd sit on my lap and tell me about her dreams." Martha gave me a sympathetic smile. "You're mourning the daughter you lost long before she left your house." The truth of it stung. As days passed, I began to notice subtle changes within myself. I no longer woke with dread or guilt. I no longer counted the hours until I could have a moment alone. Life had become simple again. Morning coffee, gardening, painting, and the occasional chat with neighbors. Yet, every so often, I'd see a family walking together through town, laughter trailing behind them like a melody, and a part of me would ache quietly, not because I wanted them back, but because I wished things had been different. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled across the hills, there was another knock at my door. I opened it to find a delivery man holding a small parcel. "Package for Mrs. Elena Torres," he said. I frowned. I hadn't ordered anything. The box was light, wrapped neatly in brown paper. When I opened it, I found a painting, a crude but heartfelt watercolor of a sunflower, signed in shaky handwriting, "To Grandma, with love." From Lily, my heart swelled. Lily was Rebecca's youngest daughter, barely 7. I held the paper gently, tears blurring the bright yellow petals. Inside the envelope was a note, scrawled in Rebecca's handwriting. "Lily wanted to send this to you. "She misses you." No apology, no explanation, just that. And strangely, it was enough. That night, I framed the painting and hung it above my kitchen table. Every morning after that, when I drank my coffee, I'd glance at it, a small reminder that love, in its purest form, still existed somewhere beyond resentment and pride. A few weeks later, Martha convinced me to join her at the community fair. The whole town gathered in the square, stalls of fresh fruit, handmade crafts, and laughter everywhere. It was the kind of simple joy I'd forgotten existed. As we wandered through the fair, I met new faces. There was Clara from the painting class, who invited me to exhibit some of my work at the upcoming summer showcase. I hesitated at first, embarrassed at the thought of strangers judging my art. But Martha elbowed me gently. "You've painted your way out of the storm, darling," she said. "Now let others see the sunshine you've found." So I agreed. In the weeks that followed, I worked harder than I had in years. Each brushstroke felt like a story being told, each color a piece of healing finding its place. I painted my garden, the sunset over the hills, even a small portrait of Martha laughing under her straw hat. When the day of the exhibition arrived, I dressed carefully in a soft linen dress and pinned a white flower in my hair. I stood quietly among the crowd as people stopped to look at my work. Some smiled, others tilted their heads thoughtfully. Then I heard someone behind me say, "There's something peaceful about these paintings." Like they were painted by someone who's finally found home, I turned to see who had spoken. It was a man, tall, silver-haired, with kind eyes. He introduced himself as Daniel, the owner of a small bookstore in town. "These remind me of my late wife's work," he said gently. "She used to paint gardens too," said flowers always tell the truth. We talked for hours that evening about art, books, and the quiet beauty of starting over later in life. When the fair ended and the crowd dispersed, Daniel offered to walk me home. As we reached my porch, he smiled. "I hope this isn't the last time we talk, Elena." I felt a warmth rise in my chest, the kind that had been dormant for far too long. "I hope not either," I said. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something extraordinary. Life was not done surprising me. Even after loss, betrayal, and years of silence, there was still room for joy, still space for connection, still time to begin again. The following days flowed by like the slow rhythm of a river at dusk. I began to see Daniel more often, though never in a rushed or demanding way. Sometimes he'd stop by the market while I was buying vegetables, handing me a small bag of coffee beans from his store. Other times he'd wave from across the street, a soft smile lifting the corners of his face. There was a gentleness in him that didn't need to announce itself. He never tried to fill the silence with chatter. Instead, he listened as though every word I spoke had weight. For a woman who had spent most of her life being talked over or taken for granted, that simple act of listening felt almost revolutionary. One Sunday morning, he invited me to his bookstore for a cup of tea. "It's quiet this time of day," he said, "and I could use some company while sorting the new arrivals." When I walked in, the smell of paper and wood filled the air, a scent that reminded me of old memories and half-forgotten dreams. The shop was small but full of warmth. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each spine a whisper from another world. In the corner stood a worn armchair covered in soft fabric, and beside it, a small round table with a vase of fresh daisies. "This place feels like a sanctuary," I said, running my fingers over the edge of a shelf. Daniel smiled. "It is, for me at least. Books don't judge. They don't demand. They just wait for you to open them." I laughed softly. "You make them sound like old friends." "They are," he replied. "Some have seen me through darker days than I care to remember." We sat at a small table near the window. The morning light spilled in, turning the dust in the air into golden specks that danced lazily around us. As he poured the tea, I noticed the slight tremor in his hand, a reminder that age, like time, leaves no one untouched. We spoke of everything: art, solitude, loss, and the quiet kind of hope that returns only after you've stopped expecting it. He told me about his late wife, Claire, a painter whose laughter still lived in the corners of their home. I told him about my husband, Javier, and the lessons his passing had carved into me. "You know," Daniel said after a long pause, Sometimes I think the hardest part of getting older isn't losing people. It's learning to keep living after they're gone. His words settled deep in me. I understood them in a way I never could have years ago. It's like carrying a house full of echoes, I said. You hear their voices in every room, but you can't turn around fast enough to catch them. He nodded. Exactly. That afternoon, when I left his store, the air was cooler, the clouds gathering for rain. I walked home slowly, thinking about the way life had a strange way of rebuilding itself in silence. You don't even notice the new foundations forming beneath your feet until one day you realize you're standing somewhere solid again. The next morning, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a handwritten note. I've saved 2 tickets for the town concert next week. Would you come with me? Dee, I smiled, pressing the paper to my chest. I hadn't been to a concert in years. That Friday, I stood before the mirror, trying on a soft lavender dress I hadn't worn since my husband's last birthday. It still fit, though my reflection looked different now, stronger, steadier. When I arrived at the square, Daniel was already there, waiting near the fountain with a shy smile. You look beautiful, he said, his voice almost hesitant as though afraid of saying too much. Thank you, I replied, feeling an unexpected warmth rise in my cheeks. We found our seats as the musicians began tuning their instruments. The first notes of the violin filled the air, gentle, trembling, full of longing. As the melody grew, I felt my heart expand, a flood of emotion I couldn't quite name washing over me. For years I had lived within the boundaries of guilt, fear, and obligation. Now, in that open square under a starlit sky, I felt those walls crumble quietly. Halfway through the concert, a slow waltz began. Couples stood up to dance, their movements illuminated by the flickering lanterns. Daniel turned to me. Would you? He asked softly, extending his hand. I hesitated. It's been so long. Then let's be rusty together, he said, smiling. We stepped into the open space, our feet unsure at first, then finding the rhythm. The world seemed to fade around us, just the music, the warmth of his hand, and the whisper of the night breeze. I hadn't realized how much I missed being held, not out of pity or expectation, but simply because someone wanted to share the same space in silence. As the final notes faded, I rested my head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman surviving. I felt like a woman living. When the concert ended, we walked along the cobblestone path back toward my house. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine. We talked little, but the quiet between us felt comfortable, like a familiar melody. At my gate, Daniel stopped. Elena, he said, I know we're both old enough to have seen our share of heartbreak. I'm not asking for anything more than your company, just the chance to share moments like this. I looked into his eyes, kind, uncertain, full of the same vulnerability I felt in myself. I think I'd like that, I said. He smiled, touched my hand gently, and walked away into the night. As I stood there watching him go, I realized how different this love was, if love it could be called. It wasn't about possession or need. It was about presence, about the quiet understanding that 2 people could walk side by side without trying to carry each other's pasts. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The moon hung low over the fields, silver and serene. I thought about everything that had led me here, the betrayals, the loneliness, the painful lessons. Every wound had guided me to this peace. Every goodbye had been a doorway I didn't know I needed to walk through, and as I took the first sip, I whispered to myself, "So this is what freedom tastes like." I smiled. Spring unfurled gently that year, like a promise I hadn't dared to expect. My garden turned into a small kingdom of color, roses, marigolds, and tiny wild violets spreading across the fence as if the earth itself was celebrating a quiet victory. I spent most mornings tending to the plants, humming softly to myself, the air thick with the scent of damp soil and sunlight. Daniel began stopping by more frequently. Sometimes he came with a new book for me to read, other times with fresh bread from the bakery or a basket of oranges. He never came empty-handed, though the true gift was always his company. One afternoon, he arrived just as I was kneeling in the dirt. Pulling weeds. You're going to ruin that pretty dress, he said, leaning against the gate with a grin. It's just an old one, I replied, brushing my hands on my apron. Besides, flowers don't care what you wear when you're tending to them. He laughed and walked in, stooping down to help me. I noticed how carefully he handled the soil, as if afraid to disturb the roots. You treat them like living things, he said. They are living things, I reminded him, smiling. You just have to listen to them. We spent the afternoon working side by side. By sunset, our hands were stained with earth, and a sense of peaceful exhaustion hung between us. He stayed for dinner that evening, simple rice and roasted vegetables. We ate on the porch as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. Do you ever miss the noise? He asked suddenly. The noise? Yes, he said, gesturing vaguely. Family, people, the chaos. I thought about it for a moment. Sometimes, I admitted, not the chaos itself, but the idea of it, the illusion that a full house means a full heart. It took me a long time to realize that peace doesn't grow where noise lives permanently. He nodded, staring into his cup. I used to think silence was loneliness. Now I see it's just space. Space for things that matter. His words lingered long after he left that night. Over the next few weeks, our friendship deepened in ways neither of us needed to name. We spent lazy afternoons reading poetry aloud, or walking through the nearby woods, where the air was thick with pine and the whisper of leaves. Sometimes we didn't speak for entire stretches, yet the silence between us was companionable, warm. One day, while sorting through old boxes in my attic, I found a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. They were from Rebecca, written when she was a teenager. I sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, the smell of dust and memories heavy around me, and began to read. Dear Mom, one letter began, I hate how you always tell me what to do. I know you think you're helping, but sometimes I just want to make my own mistakes. Another read, I want to travel someday. I don't want to end up stuck here like you. I smiled sadly at that one. How much we think we know when we're young. How fiercely we try to outrun the people who raised us, only to carry their shadows anyway. The last letter was shorter, written years later. Mom, I don't know why I keep coming back to you when I've hurt you so much. Maybe because I know you'll always forgive me. That one broke me. I pressed the paper to my chest, tears spilling freely. I forgave her then, fully and without resistance. Not because she asked, but because forgiveness was the only way to keep living without bitterness. When I told Daniel about the letters, he listened quietly. You're brave, he said finally. Not everyone has the courage to forgive what can't be undone. It's not bravery, I said softly. It's necessity. Carrying anger is like watering weeds. It grows until it chokes everything else. He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. You make healing sound simple. It's not simple, I said, but it's possible. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, Rebecca's. My hands trembled as I opened it. Mom, it began, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About how things ended. I won't pretend to understand your choices, but maybe I finally respect them. I know now how hard it is to raise a family and keep your own soul intact. I'm sorry if I made it harder. Lily still talks about you every day. She keeps that painting you framed on her nightstand. I hope someday we can visit, on your terms. I reread the letter 3 times, my heart swelling with something tender and painful all at once. Not everything was healed, but something inside had shifted. The door wasn't closed anymore. It was simply waiting for the right knock. When I told Martha, she clapped her hands together. See? The seeds you plant in love always bloom, even if it takes years. That night, I wrote back. My letter was short. Rebecca, thank you for your words. My home will always be open when respect walks through the door. Give Lily my love. Weeks later, Rebecca called again. Her voice was softer this time. We spoke not as mother and daughter locked in battle, but as 2 women learning to forgive the past. We didn't talk long, but for the first time, there was no tension. Only an easy quiet that made me think of sunlight after rain. When I hung up, Daniel was sitting on the porch reading. I joined him, and he looked up with a question in his eyes. She's coming around, I said. He smiled. Of course she is. People always return to the places where they were loved right. I rested my head on his shoulder. The evening light was fading, and the first stars began to appear. You know, I said softly, I used to think love meant saying yes to everything. But now I see it's knowing when to say no, and still staying open to yes again later. He chuckled. That sounds like something you should write on a painting. Maybe I will, I said. Maybe I already have. In that moment, the wind brushed past us, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden, and I felt something shift inside me again, a small, steady certainty that I had not lost my family. I had simply found myself, and somehow that was enough. The summer heat arrived like a warm embrace, thick and fragrant with honeysuckle. My little house seemed to hum with quiet contentment. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of the breeze through the curtains felt like the rhythm of a life finally lived on my own terms. By then, 6 months had passed since the day my family left in a storm of anger and indignation. The echoes of that chaos had long faded, replaced by birdsong, laughter from neighbors passing by, and the occasional sound of Daniel's old truck rumbling up the dirt road. I had begun to paint again. Not for money, not to impress anyone, but because I wanted to see what my soul looked like in color. My little spare room had transformed into a studio, walls lined with canvases of fields, trees, and skies. There was one painting, though, that I kept turning back to. A small white cottage surrounded by wildflowers, bathed in early morning light. My house, my freedom. Daniel often joined me in the afternoons. Sometimes he'd read aloud while I painted, old poetry, bits of philosophy, even recipes he swore were literature in their own right. Listen to this, he said one day, holding up a page from an old cookbook. A perfect loaf of bread requires patience, warmth, and time, like all good things worth having. I laughed, wiping a streak of blue paint from my cheek. You see, even bread understands life better than some people, he grinned. You should write that on your kitchen wall. Our friendship had deepened into something quiet, but profound. There was no rush, no label, no expectation. We shared silences that spoke more than words ever could. Sometimes I caught him looking at me the way one looks at a painting they don't quite understand, but can't stop admiring. One morning, I received another letter, this time from Lily, my granddaughter. The envelope was decorated with colorful stickers and uneven handwriting. Dear Grandma, it began. Mom said I can write to you now. I miss you. I told my teacher about your garden, and she said it sounds like heaven. Can I come visit in the summer? I'll help you water the flowers. Love, Lily. Tears filled my eyes before I reached the end. There was no manipulation in those words, no agenda, just love in its purest form. I wrote back immediately, Dear Lily, I would love that more than anything. The garden misses your laughter. Bring your favorite hat. The sun can be tricky here. Love, Grandma. When I told Daniel about it, he smiled. Looks like you'll have company soon. Yes, I said softly. The kind that comes with love, not demands. We began preparing for her visit like two conspirators in joy. I painted a small stool for her with little daisies on the legs. Daniel fixed up an old swing he found at the market, hanging it from the sturdy oak in my backyard. Martha donated a child-sized watering can shaped like a frog. When Lily arrived in July, the world seemed to brighten just for her. Her laughter filled every corner of the house, and her tiny hands seemed to bring everything to life. She helped me plant new flowers, painted her own little rock garden, and spent hours chasing butterflies. One afternoon, while Daniel and I watched her from the porch, she turned to us and said, Grandma, are you and Mr. Daniel married? Daniel choked on his lemonade, and I laughed so hard I nearly spilled mine. No, sweetheart, I said. We're just good friends. Oh, she said, thinking deeply. You look like people who love each other. Her words hung in the air, innocent yet piercing. Daniel looked at me, and I could see the faintest blush on his cheeks. After she went inside to fetch her paints, he turned to me and said quietly, Maybe she's not entirely wrong. I didn't answer right away. My heart was thudding softly, not with the wild rhythm of youth, but with the steady pulse of understanding. Maybe not, I finally said, and that was enough. That evening, as the three of us ate dinner under the stars, I felt a joy so pure it almost frightened me. It wasn't the loud, overwhelming kind of happiness I used to chase. It was calm, rooted, like the steady glow of fireflies in the dark. A few days later, Rebecca called. Her tone was careful, almost shy. "Mom," she said, "Lily told me she's having the time of her life. Thank you for taking her in." "She's a delight," I said truthfully. "I'm glad she came." There was a pause on the line. "I wanted to apologize again," she said finally. "For everything. I didn't realize how much I took from you until I started feeling it myself." Her voice cracked slightly, and in that sound, I heard the young woman she once was, the one who still needed her mother's reassurance. "Rebecca," I said gently, "you don't have to keep apologizing. What matters is what we do from here." "I'd like to come visit," she said. "Not with everyone, just me and Lily, maybe next month?" My throat tightened. "You'd be welcome," I said softly. After we hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, letting the quiet evening wrap around me. The sky was deep blue, and the air smelled of jasmine and freshly cut grass. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that setting boundaries meant pushing people away. But now I understood. It was the only way to let the right ones find their way back. Later that night, Daniel joined me with 2 cups of tea. "You're smiling," he said. "I am. Good news?" "Yes," I said. "Rebecca's coming to visit." He smiled, but there was a shadow of worry in his eyes. "Are you ready for that?" "Yes," I said firmly, "because this time I know where the door is and how to open and close it when I choose." He raised his cup in a mock toast. "To doors that finally lock and open at the right times." I laughed, clinking my cup against his. "And to people who know the difference between entering and invading." When Lily went to bed, I sat alone for a while, staring at the moonlight spilling across the floor. My heart felt both full and calm, 2 feelings I never thought could coexist. In that moment, I realized something simple yet profound. Peace wasn't the absence of people. It was the presence of self-respect. And after a lifetime of being everything for everyone else, I had finally become something for myself. Rebecca and Lily arrived on a Saturday morning at the end of August. The air was warm but not stifling, the kind of morning that promised good things if you moved gently enough through it. When I saw their car pull up the gravel path, my heart skipped in that complicated rhythm that only mothers understand, a mixture of love, apprehension, and the faint ache of too many memories. Lily jumped out first, waving wildly. "Grandma, we brought cookies!" Rebecca followed, slower, carrying a tin wrapped with a ribbon. Her smile was tentative, but it was a smile nonetheless. "Mom," she said softly, as though the word itself might break if spoken too loudly. "Rebecca," I replied, my own voice catching slightly. We stood for a moment, just looking at each other. 2 women who had shared a lifetime of love and hurt, forgiveness and pride. Then I opened my arms and she stepped into them. For the first time in years, the hug wasn't heavy with expectation or guilt. It was simply what it should have always been. Mother and daughter rediscovering one another. "Welcome home," I whispered. She smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mom." Inside, the house smelled of coffee and lemon polish. Martha had dropped by earlier to help me set out fresh flowers and slice fruit for breakfast. She'd winked as she left. "Start fresh, Mary. Don't rehearse the past. Rewrite it. Now." As Rebecca sat at the table and poured coffee, I saw something new in her eyes. Exhaustion, yes, but also humility. "This place looks beautiful," she said. "I can't believe how different it feels." "I can," I said, smiling. "It finally feels like mine." Lily was already exploring the garden, calling out the names of flowers she remembered. "Grandma!" The sunflowers got taller. "Yes, sweetheart," I called back. "They've been waiting for you." Rebecca stirred her coffee and sighed. "She talks about you all the time, you know. I think she missed this place more than I realized." "She missed being seen," I said quietly. "Children always do." Rebecca looked down, her face tightening. "I guess I haven't been the best at that lately." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "You've had a lot on your plate." Life doesn't come with a manual, just lessons. Some of them hard. She met my gaze and nodded, eyes glassy. I want to do better. For her and for us. That's a good start. We spent the day in small, ordinary moments that felt extraordinary. Walking through the garden, baking together, laughing over Lily's endless stories. Every sound, every shared smile felt like a quiet healing. In the afternoon, Daniel stopped by with a basket of peaches from his orchard. Lily ran to him, calling out, "Mr. Daniel!" She had adored him since her last visit. "Ah, my favorite artist," he said, crouching down. "Did you bring your paints?" "Of course," she beamed. "Grandma and I are painting the big oak tree tomorrow." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, whispering to me, "He's the one who helped you fix the garden, right?" "Yes," I said simply. She studied me for a second, then smiled knowingly. "He seems nice." "He is." That evening, we all sat outside eating peach cobbler while the sun dipped below the hills. Rebecca watched Lily play and said, "You know, I used to think strength meant doing everything for everyone else. I thought that's what you taught me. But now I see it's the opposite. You were trying to teach me to stand up for myself." I chuckled softly. "It took me 69 years to learn that lesson myself." "You're ahead of schedule." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. It was the sound of something broken quietly mending. After Lily went to bed, Rebecca and I stayed on the porch. The night air was cool, and the stars shimmered like scattered silver dust. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "I know I hurt you. I know I took advantage. I was just desperate. When David lost his job, I panicked. You were always the one who fixed everything. It was easier to depend on you than to face the mess we'd made." I listened quietly, letting her words settle in the space between us. "I understand, Rebecca. But depending on someone is different from using them. Love doesn't mean carrying someone's entire weight. It means walking beside them." She nodded, tears glistening in the moonlight. "I see that now. And I want to change things. I've started working again, part-time at a local school. It's not much, but it's mine. I even opened a small savings account for Lily's future." Pride swelled in my chest. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," she smiled weakly. "Thank you, and I wanted to give you something." From her bag, she pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a check. It's not a lot, but it's for what we owed you that summer. The food, the electricity, everything. I stared at the check for a long time, then looked at her. "Rebecca, you don't have to—" "I do," she interrupted. "It's not about the money. It's about respect. You deserved it then, and you deserve it now." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened and tears blurred my vision. "Thank you," I finally whispered. "This means more than you know." We sat in silence for a while, just breathing the same cool night air, no longer mother and daughter divided by years of resentment, but two women finding their way back to love. When Daniel came by the next morning, he found us in the kitchen, laughing as we tried to rescue a batch of overbaked muffins. "You two sound like a comedy act," he said. Grinning. "We're a work in progress," Rebecca replied, smiling at me. After breakfast, Lily dragged us outside to see her newest painting, a simple picture of 3 figures holding hands in front of a house surrounded by flowers. "That's you." "Grandma," she said, pointing to the figure in the middle. "And that's Mommy and me. And Mr. Daniel's over there with the peach tree," Daniel chuckled. "I've never looked better." I felt tears prick my eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Somehow, through all the pain and loss, love had found its way back, quieter, wiser, stronger. That evening, when Rebecca and Lily packed up to leave, there were no harsh words or guilt trips, no emotional blackmail, just long hugs, soft smiles, and promises to visit again soon. As their car disappeared down the road, I felt a deep, peaceful certainty settle in my heart. This time, they weren't leaving because they were angry. They were leaving because they finally understood, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt proud. Autumn arrived quietly that year, the kind of season that hums instead of shouts. The trees along my garden's edge turned golden one by one, until the entire yard looked as if it had been brushed by light. I had fallen into a rhythm that felt peaceful. Mornings with coffee on the porch. Afternoons painting or tending to the garden. Evenings with neighbors who had become friends. There was no rush anymore, no endless list of other people's needs to attend to. And then, one morning, the phone rang. It was Emily, David's wife. Her voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Mary, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from." I sat up straighter. "Emily, what's wrong?" "It's David," she said, swallowing hard. "He's in the hospital. He had a heart attack last night." For a moment I couldn't breathe. No matter what had happened between us, no matter how much pain they'd caused, hearing that someone I once considered family was fighting for his life stirred something deep inside me. "I'm so sorry," I said softly. "How is he now?" "They're keeping him stable," she said. "But I don't know what to do, Mary. The kids are scared, the bills are piling up." "I know it's not fair to ask, but Emily," I interrupted gently, "take a breath. You don't have to ask me for anything right now. Just focus on him. Do you want me to come by?" There was a long pause. "Would you? After everything?" "Yes," I said. "After everything." When I arrived at the hospital, the smell of antiseptic and coffee hit me, the familiar scent of waiting and worry. Emily met me in the hallway. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "I didn't know who else to call," she admitted. "The others? Well, they've all drifted away." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing." When I saw David lying in the hospital bed, I felt a pang of sadness, not for what had been, but for what could have been if pride and greed hadn't come between us. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. The man who had once raised his voice in my living room now lay silent, tethered to machines. His eyes fluttered open, and for a second, confusion crossed his face. Then recognition. "Mary?" "Yes," I said softly. "It's me." He tried to speak, but I shook my head. "Don't strain yourself. Just rest." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I was wrong." I squeezed his hand gently. "Rest, David. We'll talk when you're stronger." But we both knew what he meant. And somehow, that was enough. Over the next few days, I helped Emily with the small things, organizing paperwork, cooking meals for the children, keeping her company during long visiting hours. She kept apologizing. "I can't believe after how we treated you, you're still here," she said one night as we sat in the hospital cafeteria. I stirred my tea and smiled faintly. Holding grudges takes more energy than forgiveness. I've learned to save my strength for better things. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You're a better person than I'll ever be." "Not better," I said. "Just older, and maybe a little wiser." David recovered slowly, and when he was discharged, Emily hugged me tightly. "You don't know what this meant to me," she whispered. "I think I do," I said. "Take care of each other. That's all I ask." When I returned home, the house felt unusually quiet. But it wasn't the kind of silence that hurt anymore. It was peaceful, like a pause between two chapters of a long story. A week later, Daniel came by with his usual grin and a small bag of chestnuts. "I heard you were playing nurse again," he teased gently. I laughed. "Old habits die hard." He sat beside me on the porch. "You've got a big heart, Mary, sometimes too big for your own good." "Maybe," I said. "But I don't regret helping. It's strange. When I stopped letting people use me, I thought I'd stop caring altogether. Turns out setting boundaries didn't harden me. It just gave me room to love the right way." He nodded. "That's the kind of wisdom people spend their whole lives chasing." We watched the leaves fall together, the air cool and sweet. That evening, Martha stopped by. She looked at me with her usual mix of amusement and affection. "I hear you saved another soul this week," she said, handing me a jar of homemade jam. "I didn't save anyone," I replied. "Just reminded them they weren't alone." She smiled knowingly. "You've changed, Mary. You used to serve people because you thought it was your duty. Now you help them because it's your choice." "I think that's what freedom really is," I said. "Exactly." She clinked her cup against mine. "To freedom, and to good jam." We both laughed. Later that night, as I sat by the window painting the golden trees outside, I realized something profound. For the first time in my life, I was no longer living reactively, no longer waiting for someone else's approval or apology. I was simply living, making choices, forgiving where I could, and letting go of what I couldn't. The next morning, I received a letter. The handwriting was careful and familiar. Rebecca's. Mom, I wanted to tell you that we're moving closer. I got a full-time position at the school, and Lily's so excited to see you more often. We've been talking about starting over, properly this time. No guilt, no expectations, just love. I hope that's okay with you. I smiled so hard my cheeks ached. When I called her that evening, her voice was bright with hope. We found a little house just 10 minutes away. It needs some work, but it has a big backyard. Lily wants to plant sunflowers, like yours. Then you'll have to come over for seeds, I said. I'd like that, she whispered. As the call ended, I felt the last remnants of bitterness fade completely. The circle was closing, not in pain, but in peace. That night, I stood outside under the autumn sky, the stars bright and sharp. I whispered to the wind, thank you for the lessons, for the losses, for the strength to begin again, because sometimes family doesn't come back the same. They come back better. And sometimes so do we. Winter crept in softly, like a familiar guest who knew exactly where to sit without being told. The frost kissed the window panes in delicate patterns, and every morning I woke to see the garden asleep beneath a blanket of white. The stillness was comforting, almost sacred. I had grown to love the quiet hum of my new life, the slow rhythm of days filled with purpose, not obligation. There was something profoundly healing in simplicity. I woke early, made coffee in my favorite ceramic mug, and painted until the smell of toast drifted from the kitchen. One morning, as I brushed pale blue skies onto canvas, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Rebecca stood there, bundled in a wool coat, cheeks flushed from the cold. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice small, tentative. I blinked, unsure whether to trust what I was seeing. "Rebecca, you're here," she nodded, clutching a tin of cookies. "I wanted to bring you these. Lily baked them." I smiled and stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." She entered slowly, taking in the house like she was rediscovering it. The last time she had stood in that living room, her voice had been raised, her eyes filled with resentment. Now she seemed older, softer. "This place looks so different," she said quietly. "Peaceful." "It feels that way too," I replied, offering her coffee. "How's Lily?" "Growing fast. She talks about you all the time. I think she remembers more than I expected." "That makes me happy," I said. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the warmth of the coffee wrapping around us. Then Rebecca sighed. "Mom, I owe you an apology. A big one." I didn't rush to fill the quiet. I let her find her words. "I used to think you were selfish," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "When you said you wouldn't help anymore, I thought you were abandoning us. But now that I've had to stand on my own 2 feet, I see it differently. You weren't pushing us away. You were teaching us to grow up." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "I wasn't trying to punish you, Rebecca. I was trying to save myself. I'd lost who I was. I know," she whispered, "and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. "I forgive you," I said. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mom." In that moment, years of bitterness dissolved. All the sharp words, the hurtful accusations, the guilt, they melted away like snow under sunlight. What remained was something fragile but pure, love stripped of expectation. Over the next weeks, Rebecca and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. She visited every few days, sometimes with Lily, sometimes alone. We cooked together, painted together, and laughed at how clumsy our attempts at pottery turned out. One afternoon, as we planted new bulbs in the garden, Lily asked, "Grandma, can I live here with you forever?" Rebecca smiled softly. "Sweetheart, we live close by now. You can visit whenever you want, but Grandma needs her own space too," Lily pouted. "But Grandma makes better pancakes," I chuckled. "That's because I use extra love. Your mom's still learning the recipe." Rebecca rolled her eyes playfully, and for the first time in years, laughter filled the garden again. A few days later, Martha came over to join us for tea. She studied Rebecca for a moment, then smiled warmly. Well, I'll be damned, she said. Looks like reconciliation's in bloom right alongside your tulips. Rebecca blushed. I've got a lot to make up for, Martha winked. We all do, sweetheart. Life's a long apology followed by a few good years of peace. We all laughed. And in that laughter, something unspoken healed. That evening, after Rebecca and Lily left, I sat on the porch watching the first snowflakes drift down. Daniel came by a little later with a box of wood for the fire. You've got quite the full house these days, he said with a grin. Never thought I'd see Rebecca here again. Neither did I admitted. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. He set the wood by the fireplace and turned to look at me. You did good, Mary. Most people would have stayed bitter. I shook my head. Bitterness only poisons the one holding it. Forgiveness, that's the cure. Daniel smiled, a spark of admiration in his eyes. You're something else, you know that? I laughed. So you keep saying. We shared dinner that night. Roasted vegetables, cornbread, and a bottle of wine Martha had brought earlier in the week. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room. As Daniel told stories about his younger days working in the city, I watched the flames dance and felt a deep gratitude settle over me. It wasn't the loud, dramatic kind of happiness I used to chase. It was quiet, steady, the kind that fills the cracks of your soul without fanfare. After dinner, he helped me with the dishes, humming an old tune under his breath. When he left, he lingered at the door for a moment. You ever think about what's next? He asked. I smiled. No need to think about it. I'm already living it. That night, as I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My hair had more silver now, my eyes more lines around them. But there was light there, the kind that comes from peace, not perfection. I thought back to the woman I'd been not so long ago, exhausted, guilt-ridden, desperate for love that came with conditions. I barely recognized her anymore. Thank you, I whispered to my reflection, to the universe, to every lesson that hurt before it healed. Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees, and I felt safe, truly safe, for the first time in decades. I climbed into bed, the sheets cool and crisp, the house quiet except for the hum of the heater. As sleep began to pull me under, one thought floated through my mind. Freedom isn't something someone gives you. It's something you claim moment by moment, choice by choice, and I had finally claimed mine. Spring came early that year, as if the world itself wanted to celebrate my rebirth. The garden, once quiet under the hush of snow, now burst into color. Tulips, daffodils, azaleas, each one more vibrant than the last. When I walked among them, I felt as though they were echoing my own transformation, proof that life, no matter how cold or barren it may seem, always finds its way back to bloom. One morning, as I knelt to plant new lavender near the porch, Rebecca arrived with Lily skipping beside her. The child's laughter carried across the yard like birdsong. "Grandma, Grandma, look what I made," she cried, holding up a crooked little clay heart, painted pink and white. I wiped my hands on my apron and smiled. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Did you make it at school?" "She made it for you," Rebecca said softly. "For Mother's Day," the words caught in my chest. "For me?" Lily nodded proudly. "Mom says you're her mom too, even though she's big now." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Come here, both of you." I pulled them close, breathing in the scent of fresh grass and the sweetness of forgiveness. After Lily ran off to play with the neighbor's dog, Rebecca stayed by my side, watching her. "I didn't realize how much I missed this," she said quietly. "Being here?" I asked. "Being us," she said. "The way we used to be, before everything got so complicated." "It's not too late," I said. "It never was." She turned to me, her eyes full of that childlike warmth I thought I'd never see again. "You really mean that?" I nodded. "I do. But we have to promise each other something. No more guilt, no more pretending, just honesty." Rebecca smiled through tears. "Deal. We shook hands like conspirators sealing a sacred pact, and both laughed at how silly we must have looked. As the day unfolded, friends dropped by, Martha with her basket of herbs, Daniel with his usual grin, and a tray of freshly baked bread. We gathered on the porch, a small circle of laughter, and shared stories. For the first time, my home felt alive in a way that wasn't burdened by obligation, but lifted by joy. Martha clinked her cup of tea against mine. "You've built something rare here, Mary," she said. "Peace has a scent in this house. I can smell it from the gate." I chuckled. "That might just be the lavender." "Don't downplay it," Daniel said. "Some people spend their whole lives chasing peace. You grew it right here in your backyard." I looked out at the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. Maybe I just stopped chasing and started listening. The afternoon sun dipped low, and for a moment everything glowed, the petals, the faces around me, even the wooden floorboards beneath our feet. I thought of the woman I'd been when this all began. Desperate, weary, afraid to speak up. If she could see me now, she'd hardly believe we were the same person. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone on the porch, watching fireflies dance over the garden. The sky was painted in streaks of gold and violet, and the air was soft with the promise of rain. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent thank you, to the storms that had tested me, to the pain that had sharpened my voice, to the quiet courage that had taught me to stand alone. But I wasn't alone anymore. Rebecca and Lily came by nearly every weekend. Daniel had become a dear companion, and Martha, my wise, unshakable friend, had practically claimed a permanent chair at my kitchen table. My days were full, not of demands, but of choices. One Sunday, while preparing lunch, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman staring back wasn't a victim anymore. Her eyes held peace, not exhaustion. Her hands moved with confidence, not hesitation. And in that reflection, I saw something else too. A legacy. The courage to say no. The strength to love without losing oneself. The quiet reminder that dignity is not arrogance. It's self-respect made visible. Lily's laughter rang from the yard, and I smiled. That was the sound of the future, one that would grow knowing that love can coexist with boundaries. As we sat down to eat, Rebecca took my hand. "You know, Mom, sometimes I tell Lily stories about when I was little, about the garden, and how you used to let me plant seeds, even though I always dug them up again 2 minutes later." I laughed. "You were impatient. You wanted flowers before spring," she grinned. "Guess I'm still like that sometimes, but I'm learning." "Good," I said, "because the best things take time, especially people." After lunch, we walked through the garden together. Lily picked a daisy and tucked it behind my ear. "Now you look like a queen," she said. Rebecca smiled. She's not wrong. As we watched the sun set over the fields, Rebecca slipped her arm through mine. "Thank you, Mom," she said softly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. Even when I didn't deserve it." I squeezed her hand. "You're my daughter. I'll always love you, but love has to be honest. That's the part I had to learn." She nodded. "And I'm still learning it from you." The last light of the day bathed us in amber. The air smelled of earth and renewal. I realized then that life, like the garden, never stops teaching, as long as you keep tending it. When the stars began to appear, I sat alone for a while, letting the cool air wash over me. I thought of my husband, of the years we'd shared, and I whispered, "You'd be proud of me, love. I finally learned what you tried to teach me." The wind stirred gently, and for a heartbeat, I felt as though he were there beside me, not as a ghost, but as a memory made kind by time. I took one last sip of tea, closed my eyes, and breathed deeply. My life was my own now. My heart, once heavy with guilt, felt weightless. Freedom, I realized, isn't just the absence of chains, it's the presence of peace. And as I looked out, Over my blooming garden, alive with color and promise, I whispered the truth that had taken me a lifetime to find. I am free.